So we're going to pick up with the second part of Lesson 7, which was on the existence of God, talking about morality and how this idea of morality actually is evidence of God's existence. Now, I want to remind you of kind of our goal here. Our goal with these classical arguments for the existence of God is to be able to establish what we call a theistic universe. A universe, theistic, means one that has something supernatural, and that would be God. So that is our goal with these. Now, we have the further burden, once we've established that, of saying not just any God, but the God of the Bible. And so that's where we're headed with this whole study eventually, is that, did you have tonight's? Okay. Well, the next one, I don't know if we'll get to it tonight. So our goal is to be able to, you're welcome, establish the existence of God with some basic logic that you might be able to help somebody to come to that understanding with some very simple things, right? Cosmological argument, what's the main idea behind it? Cause and effect, very good. Yep, the main idea behind, and those cause and effect's a universal truth, right? And so we're able to say that the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Cause and effect. What's the main idea behind the teleological argument? Design, yeah. Things that are designed have a designer. The earth, the universe, us, all shows extreme evidence of design, therefore the universe has a designer. And tonight we're going to continue with a moral argument. And so we left off having discussed morality in general, the idea of morality and ethics, and that you really only have two options as to the source of morality in our world today. Because everybody, no matter where you are, has some sort of set of right and wrong. Agreed? You can go to anywhere, at any point in time, in any culture, everybody has a set of right and wrong. Now, they define it differently, which that's part of the problem, but the fact that there's a morality at all is what we're talking about. That there's right and wrong, period. Now, when you get into the study of ethics, and you head down that whole study, then we're talking about how do we determine the right ethic, the right moral for this specific thing, and so forth and so on. That's another subject, but we're talking about the existence of ethics and morals, period. In all times and places, everybody has a form of right and wrong. So there's only two possible sources of the fact that morality exists and ethics exists. What are those two possible sources? God's one, right? There's some sort of objective source of values in ethics and virtue, or what's the other source? Within man himself. So man has determined. So your only two options are man has created morals and ethics, or it's something outside of ourselves, that objective God. And so that's your only two options. And so the atheist, the materialist, the naturalist has to say that it originates within man. That's their only option, right? And so if morals and ethics originate within man, what set of circumstances do we have?
Whatever we think's right.
Say it again?
Whatever man thinks right.
Yeah. Whatever
we desire.
Whatever man determines is right or wrong, that's right or wrong. So how then, what's the mechanism or the process or the driving force in determining right and wrong if man is the source?
Your conscience.
Okay, conscience, okay. Ultimately, what's the driving force that creates morals and ethics within a society when man is the determiner?
Might.
Might. Power. Those said, Larry? All right, you get credit. All right, you both get credit. 50 points apiece. All right, so at this point, might makes right, right? Those who hold power, however that power is given or manifested, are the ones who determine what is right and what is wrong. And for the most part, unfortunately, even in our society today, we have given over to that dynamic. See, in a, quote, democratic society, we have given over that determination of what is right and wrong to the majority. Right? Right. And so we've kind of abrogated our responsibility as a church to say, no, it's not majority. There's an objective source of values and morals and virtues which we look to, and that's ultimately God's nature and character revealed to us in His Word that determines what is right and what is wrong. So, if we're going to have a system that works on majority, then the only way that a true system of right and wrong is put into place is if the majority looks to an objective source of morality. Are you with me? So what then is our responsibility?
Point out that source.
What's that?
To make known that
To make known the source. But if you're not the majority, then what else can you do other than to make it known?
Teach it.
Teach it, make it known, same kind of idea. We're talking about in a democratic society.
to not be pushed off of it.
Okay, now hold our ground, absolutely.
Practice it.
Practice it, yes, we do need to live it.
And make the other side defend their stance.
Okay, we obviously have to say, and that's kind of, we talked about that a little bit last week, in reversing the burden of proof, they have to ultimately ground why they believe something is ultimately right or ultimately wrong, which they can't if man is the sole determiner. But what I'm trying to say is this, is if right and wrong in a democratic society is determined by the majority, then we ought to put people, put people in place that look to this standard. And that's the way that our founders set up this country. If you read all the founding documents and all the things that surrounded it, every one of them said something to this effect. You cannot govern a nation without virtue and religion, or they would call it nature's law or natural law. You cannot rightly govern a nation without morality and virtue. And when they spoke of that, they weren't speaking about just the idea in general. They were talking about biblical virtue and morality. They knew. And so we have allowed ourselves to depart from that, to run from it, to remove God from everything, and now we see the result of that. How many babies have been killed in the womb?
Billions.
Millions. And so, let's talk about then, where we were moving on into our lesson notes, about the practical impact of morals and ethics without God. This is where we are. This is where we are as a society in general. So what a person believes greatly impacts how a person acts. Absolutely. That's the idea of the term worldview. We've talked about this. Every person has a worldview. They have a belief system. Even the atheist will say, I don't believe in anything. Yeah, you do. You have a belief system. You believe in nothing. And so you've based your life in what you believe to be true, and then make decisions based on that. How you think, feel, act, what you value is a person's worldview. Everyone has one. So what a person believes greatly impacts how a person acts. This fact can be seen quite clearly by looking at the effects of incorrect beliefs concerning morality and ethics. What a terrible price we humans have paid because of our incorrect beliefs and the actions based on those beliefs. In the evolutionary scheme of things, man occupies the same status as what? An animal. an animal. He may be more knowledgeable or more intellectual, more scheming than his counterparts in the animal kingdom, but when all is said and done, he is still an animal, an evolved creature. Well, I don't even like using the word creature because that implies that you're created. And so the question is bound to arise. Why should man be treated any different than an animal when his life is no longer thought to be worth living? Let me ask you this question. You'll see a car on the same bumper, save the whales, pro-choice. Huh? Now, Kelly and I, we love to travel. I love the beach. I love the beach. I love the ocean. And we normally go to the east coast of Florida when we go to the ocean. And so the last couple of years we've gone to Cocoa Beach, but we've spent quite a bit of time in Vero Beach. And Vero Beach is along that coast. One of the things they're famous for are the loggerhead turtles. And so they will mark out a spot where they've nested in the sand, put some sticks around it, some orange tape, and some signs. If you disturb it, federal crime. Why? Because there's baby turtles in there.
Eggs.
Yeah, eggs.
They've just elevated animals above humans.
Federal crime if you disturb that nest of turtle eggs. I mean, I don't remember the exact fines and jail time, but it was substantial. Now, how is that okay? But a turtle egg in a mama's belly we can dispense with that. How's that possible? Well, because we view ourselves as nothing more than an animal. Why should man be treated any different? Truth be told, there's no logical reason that he should. From cradle to grave, life from an evolutionary viewpoint is viewed as disposable. Thus, it's not surprising that we see weak or unwanted humans being destroyed just as if they were animals. January 22nd, 1973, United States Supreme Court, in a 7-2 vote, decided that the human embryo growing within the human womb no longer is human. Rather, it is a thing that may be ripped out, slaughtered, tossed into the nearest garbage dump, and the lengths to come will go to order to justify the position, or the lengths that some go to justify a position are incredible. And so when we understand Charles Darwin's basic idea, what was Darwin's basic idea? He had a couple. There were two main ideas that in his theory of evolution, what were the two ideas that really were common and the ones that were pushed forward?
Was it survival of the fittest?
Okay, survival of the fittest. So what's that say?
Strong survive.
Yeah, the strong survive, so the weakest are disposable. The weakest ones are disposable. And so weaker members, according to Darwin, members of society are unfit and under the laws of nature normally would not survive. So when a prize racehorse, what happens to a prize racehorse when it breaks its leg and they can't get it fixed?
Put it down.
Put it down. So they put it out of misery. And it's sad. I mean, that's sad. No, none of us. I mean, we all would be sad about that. It's not a good thing. The racehorse, however, is not someone's father, mother, brother, or sister, which is why we do put them down. Since nature selects against the weaker animal, and since man is viewed as an animal, why should man expect any better treatment? Who is weaker than a tiny baby growing in the womb? The baby cannot defend itself, cannot feed itself, and cannot even speak for himself. He or she is completely dependent upon the mother for life. So it should it surprise us that some are willing to figuratively put a bullet in its brain and murder it through abortion as if it were dispensable as a broken down racehorse. Once those who are helpless, weak, and young become dispensable, here's the question. Who's next?
The old.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't Dr. Kevorkian or something?
Sure.
He was a certain age.
Euthanasia, and believe that mercy killings, and that they were doing something good by doing those things. Yeah, we're going to talk about that here in a little bit more. Now here's the question. Will it be the helpless, the weak, the old? Will it be those whose sickness makes them unfit to survive in a society that value the beautiful and the strong? Will it be those who are lame, blind, or maimed? Will it be those whose IQ falls below a certain point or whose skin is different color? Some in our society are calling for such cleansing processes to be made legal using euphemisms such as euthanasia or mercy killing. After all, we shoot horses, don't we? Strong words here. This is strong. So that is the state of affairs, the practical impact of morals and ethics without God. Now let's talk about morality, ethics, and the existence of God. Now the late atheist of Harvard University, George Gaylord Simpson, once wrote, now he's an atheist, he wrote this, that, quote, morals arise only in man. What did he say? What's he saying?
What he's saying is that of all things living on this earth, only mankind has a sense of right and wrong.
That's true.
Only mankind, by extension, only mankind will seek punishment of an individual for doing wrong.
Or reward for what is right.
Or reward for
Think
what is
about,
right.
remember when we started this lesson, we talked about a lion and a gazelle, right? Never been a lion that's sitting there munching on a gazelle going, man, I feel really guilty about this. Poor gazelle. Maybe I shouldn't have done this.
On the flip side of this, animals typically don't get joy from torture or cruelty. This is a flip side of moral.
Okay. We'll get there in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk about this then. So if that's the question, morals arise only in man. I don't know if he realizes the implications of what he's saying. See, by saying this, whether or not he meant to, he verified the fact that morality is something unique to mankind. No two apes ever sat down and said, hey, I've got a good idea. Today let's talk about morals and ethics. But all too often children are taught that what? That they are nothing more than naked apes. And they are intelligent enough to figure out exactly what that means. Convince children that they evolved from animals, and you know what you get? They'll act like animals. With guns blasting, children, some as young as 10 or 11 years old, bearing a grudge or wanting to settle a score, walk into school hallways, classrooms, and libraries, shoot until they have emptied every round from all the gun's chambers, and watch gleefully as shell casings, teachers, and classmates alike fall silently at their feet. Then parents, administrators, and friends congregate in the middle of the bloody aftermath and wonder, what went wrong? Yet why should we be shocked or enraged by such conduct? According to the laws of nature, only the strong survive. Children have been taught that religion is an outward sign of an inner weakness or crutch used by people too weak and cowardly to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Why then should we be at all surprised when they react accordingly or even violently? After all, the law of nature is really kill or be killed. The truth of the matter is that only the approach which states that morals originate in the mind of God is consistent logically and internally. Only the approach that calculates God into the universe can provide an objective, absolute set of morals and ethics. And that's so important because without an objective source, there's nothing that anybody can say is truly right or truly wrong. Without an objective, outside of ourselves source of right and wrong. Think about this. I don't know how many of you studied, but we're all aware of what happened with Nazi Germany. Right? You can read and study. They believed they were acting morally. That their cause was a just cause. And even in some cases, some weird understandings, they were carrying out the will of God, which is a little warped. Well, it's a lot warped. But ultimately, they were very much influenced by evolutionary thought and weeding out lesser than individuals and races from our society. But they believed what they were doing and convinced other people, many people, that what they were doing was morally right. Well, without an objective source of right and wrong, we can't say that they were wrong. You can't ultimately say that the Nazis were wrong without an objective source of right and wrong. Now,
you can say it, but you can't prove it.
You can't ground it. You can't prove it.
Yeah.
You can say it, and common sense would say, well, they were absolutely wrong. There's no greater evil than we've known. Well, you can't really say that we're talking from a logical standpoint of grounding our beliefs, reversing the burden of proof, and saying, well, who's to say that they weren't truly right or truly wrong? There's nothing, only society and individuals determine what's right and wrong. So they had power, so they were right. Terrible thing to think about, but that's the way that most of our world operates. See, if we understand that there is an objective, absolute set of morals and ethics, then we actually have hope for this situation. See, true morality is based on the fact of the unchanging nature of Almighty God. See, this is the foundational point, is that His unchanging nature. See, we talk about there in your notes that God is eternal. He is just and righteous. And He's always consistent. God never changes. In the ultimate sense, only God is good. He is actually goodness itself. Furthermore, since He is perfect, the morality that comes from such a God is good, unchanging, just, and consistent. Exactly. Now think about this. Let's think about the nature of good and evil throughout history. And what people have thought is good, what people have thought is evil. Okay, let's think about the old Salem witch trials, right? They were burning people to the stake. Why? Because they thought what they were doing was good. They didn't have an ultimate. Right, so let's think about this, all right? So, we say that God is eternal. He is just and righteous. He's always consistent, never changes. That idea, it's a fancy word we call immutability. He's immutable, right? He's goodness itself, and He is perfect. Now, think about this on the other side of things, where we understand that good and evil, that right and wrong are determined according to ideas which are relativistic or deterministic or situational ethics of the world. Totally opposite of those ideas. When people suggest that humans feel responsibility for wrong action, they recognize that there is a need within each man, woman, and child, a sense of moral responsibility which comes from the fact that God is our Creator. I will say this. You could ask someone, what's the fundamental fact of your existence in relationship to God? And some people say, well, God, Jesus is my Savior. Right? That's a great fact. But before you relate to Jesus as your Savior, you relate to God as your Creator. The fundamental fact of our existence is that we are creatures. That's the fundamental fact. As important and as impactful is the fact that we are saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. But you can't relate to God as Savior until you relate to Him as your Creator. I firmly believe that. See, Our sense of moral responsibility comes from the fact that God is our creator, that we're creatures, and that we have been made in his spiritual image. As the potter has the right to rule over the clay that he molds, so our maker has sovereign right over his creation, since in his hand is the soul of every living thing. As the biblical character Job learned much too late, God is not a man with whom a person can argue. Job 9:32. Whatever God does, commands, and approves is good. What he has commanded results from who he is, and therefore also is good. See, remember we've talked about this? If right and wrong is determined according to the nature and character of God, which has always existed, then from the moment he created, then those things which are right and wrong exist. In our world. So when we talk about, remember when our Exodus study, when we talked about the 10 Commandments? Right? So was it only wrong to lie until or after the point that it was written on the 10 Commandments, on the tablets?
No,
It was wrong before. When was it wrong?
always.
From the beginning, right? Why? Because it is against the nature of God. God is
Holy.
truth and holy, right? God is truth, therefore lies are inconsistent, contrary to his nature, so it's always wrong. What about murder, taking life? It was only wrong when it was written on the 10 Commandments?
Nope.
That's when the law was instituted, right?
Cain knew it was.
Yeah, it was wrong from the beginning. So we understand that the nature and the character of God, which defines what is right and what is wrong, has always existed, so that when he created, the moment that man came into existence, right and wrong existed, and he gave us the ability to know what those things are. And I believe firmly that that is written upon our hearts. Every person in every place has some idea of what is right and what is wrong. I would like someone to do a study that would just have a little extra time to go and study throughout history in every culture, and even now, to go to every culture and every place and ask the question, is it okay to torture babies for fun? I'm willing to bet that in every society that's ever existed, the answer would be, no, it's not okay. Because there's something innate within us that we know that that's wrong. We know that certain things are wrong. And some other people will say, no, everything's relativistic. It all depends on the circumstances. Nothing is ultimately right or ultimately wrong. Punch them in the mouth and see what they think. Don't really do that. Do you think they'll think anything is wrong at that moment? If they say, well, there's no such thing, ultimately, it's right and wrong, it's all relative, just pop them right in the nose. Good one. I'm pretty sure that they're going to say, what are you doing?
Don't judge.
You just hurt me. That's wrong.
Oh, it's relative.
Well, not to me. I actually felt pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I think the pro-lifers would feel the same way. They think that it's an inconvenience because they got that way.
You're pro-choice.
Pro-choice.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Pro-choice. They got that way. So if I walked up to them with a 357 and put it to their head, I said, well, you're an inconvenience to me. Would they feel the same way?
Probably not. That's the logic of the situation. When we apply real logic to things and ultimately what we know to be right and wrong, I mean, how is it that in the same states that abortion's okay, that you can be prosecuted for double murder by killing a pregnant woman?
Exactly.
Makes no sense.
Okay.
Makes no sense. Because there's no ultimate grounds of this, but outside of the nature and character of God. So if it's always, if something's right, it's always been right. If something's wrong, it's always been wrong, because it's the foundation, the objective source of right and wrong is in God's nature and character itself, which never changes. So, in the Old Testament, the prophet Micah declared of God, He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In the New Testament, the Apostle Peter wrote, but as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy, 1 Peter 1:15. The main idea of ethics based on God concerns the relationship of man to his Creator. God Himself is the unchanging standard of moral law. His perfect holy nature is the foundation of right and wrong, good and evil, upon which they are built. Now, let's talk about now how we can logically talk about what's called the moral argument for God's existence. So let's think about the way we've been talking here. So every I'm trying to.
Every law.
What's that?
Every law.
Okay, not yet. When we go back to cosmological, we would say that every material effect has an adequate cause. That's a fancy way of saying it. But everything that has a beginning, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, so that's called a logical syllogism. And so the same thing with the teleological argument, which is centers around design. Every design has a designer. The universe shows evidence of being highly designed, therefore the universe has a designer. So now we come to this, the moral law, which we've determined that we've made the truth claim that in all times and all places, in all cultures, all peoples have an understanding of what is right and what is wrong, that they have an idea of what is moral, what is ethical, and so therefore we say that morality at a fundamental level exists. So we would say it this way: every law has a lawgiver, right? Are there any laws that exist that just spontaneously appeared? No, it's every law has a lawgiver. Do you have to spend any time arguing that? It's kind of a simple universal truth, right? Now, the second line, there is a moral law. Then we would say, therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. So when we say that moral law exists, we mean that all people are impressed with a fundamental sense of right and wrong. So we talk about this idea of moral law. And so we talk about the laws of logic and math. The evidence is non-material, but it's real. We know that math exists, but it's non-material. It's not something you can feel, right? Our local mathematician over here knows the math exists. I just want to throw out a problem so you can figure it out in your head. But he's good. He's good. Him and Griff both are. I'm just not sure Griff's listening. All right, so is he back there? Okay, all right, so the reason we believe we ought to do good rather than evil, the reason we believe we should help people is because there's a moral law that has been written on our hearts. In other words, there is a prescription to do good that has been given to all of humanity. Some call this moral prescription conscience. Others call it natural law. Still others, like our founding fathers, referred to it as nature's law. If you go back and read some of the old writings when they talk about natural law or nature's law, what they mean by that is not like they're out in the woods and they observe gravity. What they mean is that there is a fundamental sense of right and wrong within every person. That's what they mean. And so that's when you read that, that's important to understand that. So we refer to it as the moral law. But whatever you call it, the fact that a moral standard has been prescribed on the minds of all human beings points to a moral law prescriber. Every prescription has a prescriber. The moral law is no different. Someone must have given us these moral obligations. So we talk about these premises. Every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. So if the first and second premises are true, the third logically follows. So we understand the first, that's a given. The second one then is there is a moral law. So we must be able to talk about, just like we did with the cosmological argument and the teleological argument, we have to be able to give good logical reasons why number 2 is right, why the second premise is correct. There is a moral law. And so how do we know then that moral law exists? Well, we've got 8 good reasons here. 8 good reasons. So the moral law, number 1, is the moral law is undeniable. Now, this is great. Relativists usually make 2 primary truth claims. First, they say there is no absolute truth.
Is that true?
Right? So what do you say to that?
Is that true?
Yeah, you turn it on its head. Is that true? Right? In this book here, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Frank Turek calls it the Roadrunner tactic. You guys remember a Roadrunner and Coyote? Right? And so the idea is that there are certain times when the Roadrunner has got the Coyote into a position where he'll be like holding a sign, or all of a sudden he realizes that there's nothing beneath his feet, nothing to stand on, and then, you know, those cartoons are great.
They are.
The best. Cartoons now are terrible. Terrible. I'm so old. Okay. Well, not really. I'm talking about cartoons. I don't know.
It's possibly a bit.
Yes. So, there is no absolute truth. You can use the Roadrunner tactic. That is an absolute truth claim when they say there's no absolute truth. It's self-defeating. Same thing. They would say there are no absolute moral values. That's a moral value that you're holding there. So, see, like absolute truth, absolute values are undeniable. While the claim there are no absolute values is not self-defeating, the existence of absolute values is practically undeniable. For the person who denies all values, values his right to deny them. Further, he wants everyone to value him as a person, even while he denies that there are values for all persons. This was clearly illustrated a number of years ago when he was speaking to a group of affluent, well-educated Chicago suburbanites. After I suggested that there are things such as objective moral values to which we all have an obligation, one lady stood and protested, "There are no real values. It's all a matter of taste or opinion." He says, I resisted the temptation to make my point by shouting, "Sit down and shut up, you egghead. Who wants to hear your opinion?" Of course, it would have been, if I had been so rude and discourteous, she would have rightly complained that I had violated her right to her opinion and her right to express it, to which I could have replied, "You have no such right. You just told me such rights don't exist." Her complaint would have been proof that she actually did believe in real absolute value. She valued her right to say that there are no absolute values. In other words, even those who deny all values nevertheless value the right to make that denial. And therein lies the inconsistency. Moral values are practically undeniable. Now, number 2, this is my favorite. Our reactions help us discover the moral law, right from wrong. So we know it by our actions. So, there was a professor who was teaching a class in ethics. And he assigned a term paper to his students. He told the students to write on any ethical topic of their choice, requiring each student only to properly back up his or her thesis with reasons and documentation. One student, an atheist, wrote eloquently on the topic of moral relativism. He argued, quote, all morals are relative. There is no absolute standard of justice or rightness. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate? I like vanilla. And so on. His paper provided both his reasons and his documentation. It was the right length, it was on time, and stylishly presented in a handsome blue folder. After the professor read the entire paper, he wrote on the front cover, F. I don't like blue folders. When the student got the paper back, he was enraged. He stormed into the professor's office and protested, F, I don't like blue folders. That's not there. That's not right. It's not just. You didn't grade the paper on its merits. Raising his hand to quiet the bombastic student, the professor calmly retorted, wait a minute, hold on. I read a lot of papers. Let me see, wasn't the paper the one that said that there's no such thing as fairness, rightness, and justice? Yes, the student answered. Then what's this you say about me not being fair or right or just? Didn't your paper argue that it's all a matter of taste? You like chocolate, I like vanilla. The student replied, yes, that's my view. Fine then, the professor responded, I don't like blue. You get an F. Suddenly, the light bulb went on in the student's head. He realized he really did believe in moral absolutes. He at least believed in justice. After all, he was charging his professor with injustice for giving him an F simply because of the color of the folder. That simple fact defeated the entire case for relativism. The moral of the story is that there are absolute morals. And if you really want to get relativists to admit it, all you need to do is treat them unfairly. Their reactions will reveal the moral law written on their hearts and minds. Here, the student realized there is an objective standard of rightness by how he reacted to the professor's treatment of him. In the same way, I may not think stealing is wrong when I steal from you, but watch how morally outraged I get when you steal from me. So, the moral law is undeniable. We know it by our actions. It's the basis of human rights, and this is what I was talking about in the founders. They understood this, right? The United States of America was established by the belief in the moral law and God-given human rights. See, when we say that they're God-given, right? And then there's a word here that we're going to talk about that we've all recited it, right? Because we've had to memorize this in school, but it means so much. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These truths are evident to all, self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Okay, the word that I want us to focus on is the hardest one to say, unalienable. Anybody here use the word unalienable today? Not me either. Right. Unalienable means this. It means cannot be taken away. Cannot be taken away. So if these rights are given by God and they cannot be taken away, that means that all people in all times have these rights. Because they're objectively sourced outside of ourselves. See, here's the key, and we don't realize this. If we say that man is the giver of rights, as soon as they give them, they can take them away. When we give up the ground that we are creatures, that we have a creator, that all men are endowed by their creator, when we give that ground, then we have in essence given whatever governing entity that's over us the ability to be the source of our rights. As soon as they give us a right, they will take it away. And what are we seeing?
Well, you see just that. Loudoun County, Virginia, with the school board trying to silence the parents.
Sure.
NEA sending a letter to the president, getting
Sure.
the DOJ involved. And beyond that, because man can't really create rights, governments tend to afford what are called positive rights of what we will do this for you, as opposed to a God-given right that which may not be done to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the important dynamics is the government is not there to provide us what our rights allow. They're there to preserve the rights themselves. And we've got that upside down. Okay. Now, so we have the moral law is undeniable. We know it by our actions is the basis of human rights. It's the unchanging standard of justice. There's no true justice if it's not objectively sourced. It defines a real difference between moral positions. Since we know what is absolutely wrong, there must be an absolute standard of rightness. The moral law is the grounds for political and social dissent. If there, in number 8, if there were no moral law, then we wouldn't make excuses for violating it. Which is what we as humans regularly do. See, God himself is the unchanging standard of moral law. His perfectly holy nature is the foundation upon which right and wrong, good and evil are built. God's will is the ultimate ground of moral obligation. So, we say this, that God is the ultimate source, the ultimate foundation upon which right and wrong, good and evil are built. God's will is the ultimate ground of moral obligation. So why are we to be holy? Well, because God is holy. Why are we not to lie? Well, because God does not lie. Since God's nature is unchanging, it follows that moral law, which reflects his divine nature, is equally unchanging. While there have been times in human history when each man did what was right in his own eyes, Judges 17:6, right? So that's basically our world. It was the world then, it's the world now. Right? What was the reason in the book of Judges that it says that each man did what was right in his own eyes? What was the first part of that verse? You guys remember?
Because there was no king.
There was no king, so each man did what was right in his own eyes. So the basic concept of there is there was a lack of an objective authority. So everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And that's ultimately what's at the foundation of this whole discussion. You can't have any discussion on ethics and morals unless we have a proper understanding of the nature of authority.
So did they quit thinking that the priests were not authority anymore?
They had.
They just had judges at that point in time. I don't know. Let's see.
They had Levitical priesthood, but
Yeah.
you didn't have. But that was religious authority. That was not a civil sovereign.
The pagans are the ones that had the kings at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
same thing happened to Samuel when they wanted wanted the king. And
Sure. Oh, yeah, same dynamic, same time frame. Yeah, and that's why they ended up with one. But the idea being that the authority was not, there wasn't proper authority, and so everybody did what they wanted. So, so we know that there are times throughout all human history that man does what's right in their own eyes. And see, that was never God's plan. He's not left us to our own devices to determine what is right and wrong. He has given us what we're supposed to do. See, he knew that through sin, man's heart would become exceedingly corrupt, Jeremiah 17:9. Therefore, God has spoken, and by speaking, he has made known to man his laws and rules through the Bible. Thus, mankind is expected to act in a morally responsible way by following biblical laws and rules. And here's the eventual conclusion of all this. Eventually, each of us will meet the righteous judgment of God, who will render to every man according to his works. It therefore benefits us to live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age, because one fact is certain: all men will face the chilling waters of death. The question we need to ask ourselves is, will we face death having lived your life with godless morals and wavering ethics, or will you enter into death knowing that you followed the morals that are unchanging and certain because they originated from the nature of the great Creator God? So, a little bit of a different lesson than we've been involved in as far as the cosmological and the teleological, but the universal nature and existence of morals gives us the ability to say every law has a lawgiver. There is moral law, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. And that ultimate lawgiver is in fact God. And so where we're going to spend some time next week, because it does have such bearing upon the cosmological and the teleological arguments, and even the moral argument, we're going to spend our next lesson on the creation versus evolution debate. And then from there, we're going to spend the rest of our time in this class discussing the nature, the historicity, the trustworthiness of the Bible itself. Because we must get from just a theistic universe to not just any God, but to the God of the Bible. And so we've got to build a coherent, complete case that gets us there. Because if all we do is establish a theistic universe, we've not gotten people to where they need to get, and that is to understanding that Jesus is the Son of God. And so we will get there by investigating the resurrection and also investigating the nature of the Bible, and that's where we're headed down the road here after our next lesson, which is the one we handed out tonight. Okay, any questions or comments?